Hey guys, Cher here, and I'm here with another book club review. I meant to do this a couple weeks ago, but as you guys know, life got in the way of that. And yes, the book that I'm going to review is another that I've received from Goodreads as a physical copy win from a giveaway. And that book is called Here So Far Away by Hadley Dyer, a Canadian author, which makes it even more interesting. This is a young adult novel, and of course, since this takes place in a culture from our neighbors up north, I thought that I would like to see that done in that perspective, which I don't do that quite often, but it's one of those things that make it kind of cool. So what I got from this book was, there's a high school senior. Her name is George, but her original name was Frances, but apparently she does not like her given name, or her family only calls her that, and her friends call her George because she's basically the most tomboy person that they know. I kinda don't get how that makes sense, but go with the flow, I suppose. She's excited for her senior year, basically, because it's the year that she's in charge of the school. Basically all your teenage stereotypes of what you thought high school was going to be. That is until you enter college and you realize the real world is going to kick your ass. Well, for George's case, the real world kicks her ass super early, because she gets into a huge fight with her best friend, who's considered one of the most popular girls in the school, and she's basically kind of ostracized from her high school society. I thought that was going to be the main plot of the story, but then you get this kicker. She then meets a new guy who comes into town, and they had a some sort of, I don't think they had a fling, I just think George started to have a crush on him. That was until she realizes that this guy is twice her age. And he says that he can't have a relationship with her because he doesn't want to get into trouble. But then for, of course, some odd reason, with all stories that end up like this, they end up having a relationship anyway. But then here's the zinger of it all. George's father used to be in the police force until he got into an accident that caused him to go on disability. And of course, yeah, he cannot work as a police officer ever again, and he basically kind of lives his glory days talking to his daughter and son. She has a brother, younger brother, who's not really relevant to much of anything, about life advice. And the life advice he keeps saying is that, I think I'm gonna butcher this direct quote, so I'm gonna paraphrase it. If it's a direct quote, thank you, me. I think the quote was on the lines of, life is a horrible writer, and that line keeps on playing throughout the entire book. I mean, it was the opening line in the first chapter, actually. So this is supposed to be the main thing that keeps this book going. And then now her father's also like really salty because there's a new police sergeant from another town that basically took his place as top dog of the police department in their Canadian town. And that police sergeant turns out to be the guy that George has a crush on. Yeah, not only did he not want to be with George because of the age difference, but it's because he has a position of power. And he's also the holder of the law. And by being in a relationship with a 17-year-old, he's breaking the law. Yeah, like, this is anything original. So I think what I want to discuss first, before I jump into why I did not like this book, or at least I was indifferent to it, is the whole life is a bad writer line. In my interpretation, I took this line as if to say, while at least American writers, or majority of modern writers actually, we tend to write stories that at least have a happy ending to them. Or if it's at least by the end of the series, it would be a somewhat happy ending. That's not for every book, it's for the majority at least. For life, most of the time, life does not want a happy ending. Like, life wants to keep challenging the main character, and basically, the person's life is a running novel of chasing this main character up a tree, and the main character has to fight to come down, and of course, who wants to read a long-ass novel? I mean, some people read War and Peace, but I digress. So that tends to be the case for George, since all of her life seems to be going downhill basically in her senior year of high school. But even with this put in place, this is basically your generic coming of age, slight forbidden romance story. Like, I've read this book a million times before, and it sounded like it want to go somewhere different, but in reality it does not. As for the characters, I do not like them. Maybe except for the dad, because he doesn't really do anything wrong. He's just one of those dads who wants to see the good things, despite the fact that he cannot be a police officer anymore due to his disability. Like, the dad's in a wheelchair. Like, he literally cannot move. It's like, these characters, like, except for, like, the mere few minor characters, they are not good people. They are, like, they do not, like, have any slight of intelligence, except for Francis, and I'm talking about the police officer guy. Like, yeah, his name's actually, Francis. It's interesting. Like, he said from the beginning, I don't want to be in a relationship with you, but then he ends up going into the relationship anyway. Like, I don't know what purpose he has, except for maybe George might be hot, I don't know. But, he had, like, no legit reason, in my opinion, to, date George in the first place, because it's obvious that George is still naive. She's dumb for even falling or trying to get with a guy who's, like, 2 or 3 times her age. And also, she had a pretty fine family life. Like, she has her mom, she has her dad, she has a brother, she's living in a fine family, yet she's pulling off this, like, dating a guy who's older than her stunt, and yeah, she is a rule breaker, like, she smokes, she fights, but smoking and fighting do not lead to, going after a guy who's too old for you and legit trying to get him to, like, fuck you, in a sense. So, yeah, even, like, Francis, the police officer, fell on the wayside because I wanted him to be the better person, but in the end he wasn't. And, oh my god. It made my head spin as of why I thought this was going to be different. I mean, there's another book that tackles the age gap relationship thing. It's called Girl in Pieces, and this is different because the main character, the girl, who, her name is escaping me at the moment, she came from a very broken family. Her mother basically abandoned her. She was in a rehab center for trying to commit suicide. She ends up living on her own. So she's basically tackling the world by herself, and she has no clue until she thinks, hey, me being in a relationship with this older guy who's basically a drug addict and an alcoholic, like, she thinks that's gonna work, but it ends up not. And that way it works because the main character had no clue. With George, she has a clue. Her father is a police officer. If he were still capable of, like, harming a person who's dating his daughter because of his age, he would be capable of hurting that goddamn son of a bitch. Like, so, I kinda don't get why this girl who came from, like, a fine standing, who is basically going through this, like, senior year, like, rebellious phase, thinks it's a good idea to go after a guy who's older than her. Like, she shows no evidence of her being the mature one out of anybody else. Like, it makes no sense to me. But if there is one thing that kept me from reading this book from beginning to end, because trust me, I could have dropped this book whenever the heck I wanted, because if I don't like a book for anything that would ruin the experience, I would have dropped it off the bat. But Dyer's writing style intrigued me to keep going, because though the story is in George's point of view, how she wrote it in George's point of view was intriguing enough that got us attracted to George just by going into her inner thought process. Like, she sounded like an interesting character from chapter 1. And I thought that was going to improve, like, throughout the story, because her thought process sounded mature, so I was like, okay, why not? But then, going through it, and when, George is trying to, explain her thought process, first of all, it either doesn't make any sense. 2, like, her personality, like, goes a 180 angle, which I don't get. Or 3 is just, useless jargon. And I'm not saying that this is, Dyer's fault in general, because I did get a book, or at least a version of the book that was not officially publishable. I think the book might be up for sale right about now, because I finished this like maybe a month or a few weeks ago. Yeah, because I got the book at like, I don't know, the beginning of April or something. So I got a pretty old copy, or at least a marketing prop, like book or whatever it is. So I am not sure that changes might have been made from this version, but I think the pretty big things, like the plot and how George basically goes through her life's a bad writer motto, those big things, I think that might ruin people from reading this book, or not, I don't know. But this is just my opinion. I'm a reviewer, not a professional critic. And also, like, what annoyed me as a grammar Nazi is that there were some like spelling errors, especially when George and Frances are talking, because they both know that both their names are Frances, since George's birth name is Frances, but they're spelled differently, because the girl Frances has like an E in her name, the guy Frances has an I in her name. Sometimes I think this might be an editing issue in general. Maybe someone skipped it. I don't know, because this is why you don't have people sharing the same name unless there's major significance. Which in this book, there is no major significance in having 2 characters share a name but with different spellings, because you're going to screw up the spelling either way, and that happens multiple times throughout this book, and it annoys me. I mean, if they don't change the name, because that's also part, like, of the marketing fan base, you know what? I don't care. But it's just, those little things, as a writer, annoy me. And this book is full of the little things that annoy me. Like, this full of cliches. It is trying to do something different, but it relies on the cliches to keep going. And it just built up a hype that went downhill, I think, a quarter way into the book. And I really wanted to stop reading this. Honestly, I did. But if I didn't finish this book, I would never have this review up, would I? So at the end of the day, I gave this book a 3 out of 5. At least that's the rating I would give it for the Goodreads reviews. If possible, I might have put it down at a 2.5 because it's not all terrible. It has some intelligence in there. Like I said, the writing style is not so jarring that it sounds immature, especially for the young adult audiences. But yeah, the characters are not that great. The plot tried going somewhere, but it ended up being your stereotypical coming of age. I think it tried to pull off a Catcher in the Rye, but it did not really work out that well because, let's face it, no book is going to beat Catcher in the Rye. So, I guess that's my synopsis on that. I'm Cait, and it's been real. Ciao!